A cold silence stretched across the galaxy as stars burned far in the distance, and shadows swallowed entire worlds. One after another, the enemy known only as the Swarm had been moving for years, devouring planets, leaving nothing behind, not even ruins, only empty space where life had once thrived aboard the Earth flagship Vanguard Commander Elias. Kane stared at the fading hologram before him, the last recorded message from the free colony of Vera. The image of a desperate woman appeared, her voice shaking as she spoke. "They are here. This is the end." The hologram flickered and then cut to black. Kane stood still for a long moment, feeling the weight of centuries pressing on his shoulders. Earth had not fought a true war in over 300 years. Humanity had lived in comfort and peace, while other corners of the galaxy burned, but now the fire had reached their door and there was no one left to stand in its way. Except for the Vanguard outside, the view from the bridge was endless darkness punctuated by the blue glow of the ship's engines and the faint shimmer of distant nebulae. The crew moved quickly around Kane. Some of them were veterans of small skirmishes, but none had faced an enemy like this. Kane's second in command, Lieutenant Mara Voss, stepped beside him, her voice low. "Commander, we should turn back if they took Vera. There is nothing left to save." Kane's eyes never left the darkness ahead. "We go forward," he said quietly, "because if we do not, Earth will be next." The order carried across the bridge like a cold wind. The Vanguard shifted course, pushing deeper into enemy territory, and soon the stars began to fade, replaced by strange shadows drifting in space. At first they looked like broken asteroids or abandoned stations, but as they drew closer, the crew realized they were hulks of ships, hundreds of them, human, alien, ancient, all floating lifeless, their hulls torn open like prey after a kill. The silence of it was worse than any battlefield. There was no movement, no sign of struggle, only emptiness as the ship's scanners reached out. They picked up something faint deep within the void, a signal not like the colony's desperate cry, but rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Kane ordered the ship to follow it, and with each passing moment, the signal grew stronger and colder. The crew felt it in their chests like it was inside them. The darkness ahead thickened until it was almost tangible, blotting out even the nearest stars, and then, without warning, the Vanguard's lights caught the outline of something impossibly vast, stretching across the void. It was not a planet, not a station. It was a ship larger than any in human history. Its surface glistened with a black metallic sheen that seemed alive, moving in slow waves, as if breathing. Strange spines rose from its hull, glowing faintly with red light, and the crew could feel those lights. Watching them, sensors flared with warnings. The shadow was not alone behind its shapes. Emerged one after another until the screen was filled with them, a fleet of living ships, each moving as if guided by the same will the Swarm had been waiting. And now they were here. A chill passed through the crew as a sound cut through the bridge. Not static, not code, but a voice. It was calm, deep, speaking in perfect human language. "We know you, Kane, and we have been waiting." Kane froze. The voice was impossible. No one in the galaxy outside Earth's territory should have known his name yet. Here it was spoken by an enemy no human had ever met. He glanced at Mara, who looked pale. The crew was silent. Only the hum of the Vanguard systems filled the air. Kane took a step forward, toward the console, speaking slowly. "Who are you?" The voice gave a low sound that might have been laughter before answering. "We are what comes after your peace, and we will show you mercy if you surrender." Kane's jaw tightened. The crew looked at him, waiting for an order, but before he could answer, the massive shadow ship moved slightly, revealing something clutched in its spines. A broken vessel, its insignia still visible. Despite the damage, it was human, and Kane recognized it instantly. It was the Horizon, a battleship lost years ago. With every soul aboard, Kane felt the tension coiled tighter in the bridge, everyone watching for his decision. But before he could speak, the lights on the enemy fleet flared brighter, and the voice returned, softer, colder. "We will take your answer now, then." Bridge was silent, but the silence was heavy, not empty. Every crew member could feel the weight of the moment pressing down like the cold of deep space. Kane stood in the center, his eyes locked on the monstrous ship that filled the view screen. Red lights along its hull pulsed slowly like the heartbeat of some ancient predator. The voice that had just spoken still lingered in the air like an echo too close to human for comfort. Kane did not answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to the console, his hand brushing the controls as if to remind himself that here aboard the Vanguard, he still held power. The crew's eyes followed him, every movement amplified by the tension. Lieutenant Maravas's voice was quiet but sharp. "Commander, we should not speak to it. Whatever this thing is, it already knows too much." Kane nodded slightly, but his gaze never left the view screen. "If they know my name, then they also know we won't surrender." The enemy ship seemed to grow even larger, the red lights shifting until they formed a pattern. An almost human face stretched across the metal skin, just long enough for the crew to see before it melted back into the alien armor. Suddenly, a wave of static tore through the bridge lights flickered, and every display glitched as the enemy sent a surge of energy through space. The Vanguard's shields held, but the crew felt a sharp pressure in their heads, as if invisible hands were pressing against their thoughts. One of the junior officers gasped, clutching his temple. "There in my mind," his voice shook. Kane turned quickly to Mara. "Cut the comlink now." But before she could act, the voice returned clearer than before. "You are alone, Kane. We have taken all others. Your worlds are dust, your friends are ours." The lights on the alien hull flared again, and a new image filled the screen. It was Admiral Reese, the man Kane had once trusted above all others, standing in a dim chamber surrounded by the shifting shadows of the swarm. His eyes were different now, darker and colder. Reese's voice carried no warmth. "You should have stayed hidden, old friend. Peace is over." Kane's chest tightened as he took a step forward. "Reese, what have they done to you?" A faint smile crossed Reese's face. "They showed me the truth. The galaxy belongs to them, and soon Earth will too, unless you give them what they want." Mara's fists clenched on the console, but Kane's face remained still, his mind turning through possibilities. "He's lying," she whispered. Kane shook his head softly. "No, he believes it." Reese's gaze sharpened. "I will give you one day, Kane, one day to decide, join us or stand against us and burn." The screen went black, the alien fleet still looming. Kane exhaled, slowly aware that the crew's fear was now thicker than the air itself. Ensign Duran broke the silence. "They've taken him. They'll take all of us if we stay." Kane turned to face his crew, his voice steady. "We are not leaving until we know exactly what we're fighting." Mara's brow furrowed. "And if we find out it's something we can't fight, then we make it something we can." The crew began working again, scanning the enemy ships, but the data made no sense. Their hulls read like living tissue. Their engines gave off no heat, and their weapons systems were integrated into their bodies. The longer they scanned, the more the crew realized these were not ships in the human sense. They were organisms. Kane studied the readings, his mind coldly, calculating if they're alive, then they can be killed. But killing them would mean getting close. Very close. Hours passed as the Vanguard shadowed the alien fleet, keeping a safe distance. The signal from the heartbeat-like pulse grew stronger, and the crew noticed it was affecting them. Their thoughts slowed, their emotions dulled, as if the pulse was trying to strip away their will. Kane ordered the shields retuned to block the frequency, but it only helped a little. In the mess hall, crew members sat in silence, staring at their food like they had forgotten why they were there. Mara found Kane in the war room, studying a holographic projection of the enemy formations. He looked up when she entered. "They want me," she said flatly. Kane's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" She shook her head slowly. "I can feel it, like they're calling to me." Kane knew she wasn't imagining it, and that meant the swarm had already found a way inside his ship, inside his people. The pulse grew stronger again, and this time it came with a final short transmission, not from Reese, but from the cold alien voice. "Your day begins now." The ticking of the ship's internal chronometers felt louder than usual, each second pulling the crew closer to the end of the 24 hours the enemy had given them. Kane sat in the captain's chair, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the black sea of space, where the alien fleet drifted like predators circling their prey. The red glow of their living hulls pulsed in unison, and it was impossible to tell if they were moving or simply waiting. The pulse signal continued, faint but constant, sliding under the skin of every person aboard the Vanguard like a whisper they couldn't ignore. Lieutenant Maravas stood beside him, her posture rigid, but her eyes restless. "Sir, if they can get inside our heads, then every second we wait is another second. They control us." Kane didn't respond immediately, his mind locked on Admiral Reese's face from the earlier transmission. His friend had been alive, but changed as though every human part of him had been drained and replaced with something alien. The thought was a thorn he couldn't shake from his thoughts. Ensign Durant's voice cut through the bridge sensors. Picking up a small object drifting toward us, Kane's head turned sharply. What kind of object? Durant's fingers danced over the controls, and the holographic projection of the space ahead lit up a single pod. Metallic but strange, its surface rippling like water in slow motion. "It's not powered, sir. It's just drifting," Kane ordered it brought aboard under full containment. As the crew moved to carry out the order, Kane and Mara descended to the hangar where the pod now sat inside a reinforced energy cage. It was about the size of a human coffin, its black surface reflecting the hangar lights with an oily shimmer. Kane stepped closer, but stopped when the surface began to shift, forming shapes that looked like symbols, but melted away before the eye could focus on them. Suddenly the pod cracked open with a sound like tearing metal. Inside lay a man, battered, bruised, but breathing. Kane's eyes widened. Reese, the Admiral's eyes, opened slowly, unfocused at first, but then locking on Kane as if waking from a nightmare. Kane moved closer, lowering his voice. "How did you get here?" Reese's voice was hoarse. "I escaped." But his tone carried something off, a slight delay between words, like the thoughts weren't entirely his own. Mara stayed back, her hand hovering near her sidearm. Her instinct screaming something was wrong. Kane ordered medics to take Reese to the infirmary, but before they could move him, he gripped Kane's wrist hard, his eyes flashing with that alien red light. Kane froze, hearing Reese speak, not aloud but directly in his mind. "You can't win. Elias, join us and Earth will be spared." Kane pulled free, his pulse quickening, but he said nothing. The medics took Reese away, and Mara stepped closer, her voice low. "That's not him. Not anymore." Kane knew she was right, but he also knew Reese was still human enough to be dangerous on the bridge. Kane reviewed scans of the pod. No propulsion, no guidance system, nothing that could explain how it reached them except one fact. The pod's outer surface was the same living material as the swarm ships, meaning it wasn't sent, it was grown. Kane realized the truth in a cold rush. They didn't send him back to warn us. They planted him here. The realization struck deep. Reese wasn't an escapee. He was a weapon. Hours passed with Reese under guard, but the effects of the pulse grew worse across. The ship crew members began forgetting orders, walking into the wrong stations, staring into space for long stretches. The Vanguard felt less like a warship and more like a haunted vessel on the brink of collapse. Kane convened a meeting with Mara and the senior officers in the war room. The holographic display showed their dwindling options. Fight now with little chance of survival, run and risk leading the swarm back to Earth, or try to stall. Kane's voice was steady but cold. "Fighting them head on will get us killed. Running will get Earth killed. Stalling might buy time, but it will cost us more of our crew." Mara leaned forward. "Then we cut the head off the snake, the big one in the middle. Take it out, and maybe the rest will break." Kane didn't like the odds, but he knew she was right. If the swarm moved as one mind, then destroying its core ship could cripple it. He ordered the crew to prepare for an assault on the massive flagship. The plan was dangerous, bordering on suicidal. But before the meeting could end, the ship's alarms screamed through the corridors. The lights dimmed, and every screen on the bridge flickered to life, showing only Reese's face, now lit entirely by the crimson glow, his voice both through the speakers and in their minds. "Your day is over. Kane, choose now, serve or burn." The red light from Reese's eyes seemed to bleed into the screens, casting the bridge of the Vanguard in a dim, unnatural glow. His voice coiled through the air and the minds of the crew with equal force, like a cold hand pressing on the back of their skulls. Kane stood in the center, unmoving, his jaw tight as every eye on the bridge turned to him. The choice Reese offered was a trap. Kane knew its surrender meant the death of their freedom, and refusal meant the death of their world. But there was a third option. One the swarm didn't know about, not yet. Kane stepped forward, his voice steady. "We are not giving you anything." The screens blinked off, and the alien fleet outside shifted slowly, almost lazily, as if the decision had been expected. Kane turned to his crew. "We have one chance. The Vanguard carries a prototype weapon. The Omega Lance designed to pierce planetary shields and destabilize core reactors. It was never tested because no one thought we'd need it, and using it could destroy us as easily as the enemy. Mara Voss's brow furrowed. That's why you didn't mention it earlier, because it's suicide. Kane nodded slightly. It's a gamble, but it's better than kneeling. Sensors show the enemy flagship is heavily shielded. The Lance will need to be fired from dangerously close range, close enough to be within their weapon envelope. Mara didn't flinch. Then we get close. The crew moved quickly into preparation, every console lit with targeting programs, power reroutes, and shield calculations, but the pulse from the enemy fleet kept washing over them like an invisible tide, draining energy from their minds. Engineers reported small malfunctions, navigation officers misread data, even the automated systems faltered. Kane realized the pulse wasn't just breaking their focus, it was rewriting the ship's responses, turning the Vanguard into its own worst enemy in the infirmary. Reese sat in containment restraints, but his eyes were fixed on the bulkhead, his lips moving in silent words. When the medics turned away, the restraints shifted almost imperceptibly, as if softening under his touch. The living material from the pod had already begun growing inside the ship. Kane ordered security doubled on him, but he knew the threat was spreading. The enemy wasn't just outside. They were already here as the final weapon checks were completed. Kane gathered the crew in the central briefing chamber. His voice was calm, but carried steel. The swarm thinks they have already won. They think fear will weaken us. They're wrong. They have taken worlds, but they have not faced Earth, not truly today. We draw the line. The crew's faces were pale, but determined. Mara gave a small nod, and the ship launched forward, engines burning bright against the black. The alien fleet shifted in response, their massive flagship turning to meet them, red light spilling across its surface. The closer they came, the more the pulse grew stronger, until Kane could hear whispers in his own thoughts promising safety if he surrendered, showing visions of Earth safe and untouched, if only he would bow. But behind those promises he could sense the lie, a cold hunger waiting to consume them all. The distance closed fast. The alien flagship's weapons began to glow deep inside its hull, organic cannons pulsing with energy. Mara's voice cut through the tension. Target in range, Kane ordered. Full power to forward shields. Prepare the Lance. The ship shuddered as enemy fire slammed into them.
Ow. Bright
flares of energy streaked across the viewports. The shields held, but every impact drained them. Kane ignored the warnings flashing across his console. Focused fire on their forward spines. The gunners responded, beams of blue plasma ripping into the alien hull, but the living armor shifted away, absorbing the damage. As if it were nothing, the Lance was charged, its power readings unstable. The chief engineer's voice came over. Comes, Captain. If we fire now, there's a 50% chance the overload will take us with it. Kane's eyes stayed on the target. Fire anyway. The order left no room for hesitation. The Lance's emitter a ray unfolded from the belly of the Vanguard, a spear of white-blue energy building until it blazed brighter than the nearby stars. The alien flagship began to move, trying to veer off, but the Vanguard pressed closer, ignoring the pounding from enemy fire. As the beam reached its peak, Kane gave the final command, fire. The Lance released in a single deafening burst, a column of light tearing through the void and slamming into the enemy flagship. The shockwave rolled through space, ripping through smaller swarm vessels and hurling the Vanguard backward. Alarms screamed across the bridge, the view outside filled with fire and shadow. For a moment, it seemed like the impossible had happened, but as the glare faded, the alien flagship was still there, damaged, yes? Its armor cracked and bleeding strange liquid into the void, but far from destroyed. Its red lights flared brighter than before, and Kane felt the voice in his mind again. Colder than ever. You think you have drawn the line, Kane, but this is only the beginning. The alien flagship loomed in the darkness, its red light flaring like a wound that refused to close the blast from the Omega Lance had torn deep into its living hull, leaving jagged cracks and spilling that strange black-red liquid into space. Yet the damage seemed only to enrage it. The pulse that had been gnawing at the minds of the Vanguard's crew surged like a storm, its rhythm faster, sharper each beat, pushing thoughts aside, replacing them with fragments of alien will. Kane gripped the arm of his chair forcing his focus back as the ship rocked under another barrage of organic plasma. Lieutenant Mara Voss steadied herself at the tactical console, her voice cutting through the chaos. Captain, shields at 30% and falling. The Lance's offline power conduits fried. Kane's eyes narrowed. They'll expect us to retreat. We're not giving them that satisfaction. Durant's voice trembled from navigation. Sir, we've got more incoming signatures. Dozens of swarm craft. Breaking off from the flagship, moving to surround us. The bridge lights flickered as impacts rattled the hull, warning klaxons. Merging into a single relentless scream, Kane's mind raced. The Lance had failed to end the fight, and now they were bleeding. Under the swarm's counterattack, retreat meant leading the enemy back to Earth. Standing still meant dying here. There was only one choice. Push forward, he keyed into comms. Engineering, reroute all auxiliary power to forward thrusters. Get me ramming. Speed. Mara's head snapped toward him. Ramming, Sir. Kane's voice was cold. If we can't kill it from a distance, we tear into it from the inside. The crew exchanged glances, but no one argued. Orders flew across the bridge. The Vanguard's engines flared white-hot, propelling the ship directly toward the massive alien hull. The swarm crafts swarmed like angry wasps, striking at the shields, but the Vanguard plowed through them. Smaller vessels bursting apart under the force of impact as they closed the gap. The alien flagship's surface shifted, its black armor peeling away to reveal rows of jagged organic cannons, their glowing maws opening in unison. Kane ordered evasive maneuvers, but there was no avoiding all of them. The ship shuddered violently as 3 blasts struck home. Consoles sparked overhead, filling the air with the acrid scent of burning circuits. Mara reported hull breach on Deck 7, but containment holding. They were close now, so close the surface of the enemy ship filled the view. Twisted metal fused with bone-like ridges, and beneath it, faint movement, like the flexing of muscle. Kane gave the order, all power to forward shields. Impact in 5 seconds, the crew braced. The Vanguard slammed into the alien hull with a force that sent everyone staggering. Alarms screamed. Damage reports flooded in, but they were inside, wedged into a wound there earlier. Lance strike had opened. Kane barked orders, deploy breaching teams. Now squads moved through the corridors, carrying heavy weapons, cutting through the strange, organic material that now surrounded them. The alien interior was unlike anything they'd seen. The walls pulsed faintly, as if alive. Thick cables that felt like tendons ran along the ceiling. The deeper they pushed, the more the air seemed to hum with the swarm's pulse inside the main chamber. They found it a vast glowing mass suspended in the center of the ship. Like a heart made of light and shadow, its surface constantly shifting shapes and colors. Mara's voice was a whisper. That's it. That's the core. Kane nodded. Set charges here and here. Maximum yield. No remote detonation. We'll trigger it manually. The team worked quickly, placing explosives along the core support structures. But the hum grew louder, and suddenly Kane felt Reese in his mind again. Elias. Don't do this. The voice was pleading, but beneath it was the sharp edge of command. You can't imagine what they'll give you. Power knowledge. The galaxy itself. Kane's jaw tightened. I already have what I need, Reese. Silence filled his head. The charges were armed. But as they turned to leave, the walls around the chamber began to shift, closing in, forming jagged spines that blocked their path. Swarm drones poured in from every opening, insect-like creatures of metal and flesh. Their limbs bladed and dripping with the same dark fluid from the hull. The firefight was brutal. Weapons fire lit the chamber in strobing bursts, drones falling one after another, but more replacing them. Kane fought his way to the core's control pedestal. Slamming his hand onto the detonator, Mara yelled over the gunfire. Captain, the blast radius will take us out. To Kane's voice was steady as he pressed the activation key. Then we make sure it's worth it. The core's glow intensified as the charges began their countdown. The hum turning into a roar, the swarm's pulse surged through every mind aboard the Vanguard, promising survival, begging for surrender. But Kane ignored it, focusing only on the timer as it ticked down to the final seconds. The timer on the detonator burned in Kane's vision, its numbers shrinking toward 0 with a relentless inevitability. The roar of the swarm's pulse filled every inch of the alien chamber, making it hard to think, hard to breathe. Mara's voice cut through the chaos. Captain, we have to move now. Kane's eyes stayed locked on the glowing core as it pulsed like a living sun, swelling and shrinking in time with the beat that pounded through his skull. Every instinct screamed to run, but another instinct told him if they left too soon the swarm might stop the countdown. He turned to Mara. "Get the team back to the vanguard. I'll finish this." Mara's eyes flashed. "With anger, you're not dying here, Kane. There's no time to argue." They both knew it. The swarm drones pressed closer. Bladed limbs clashing against armor, sparks flying from every impact. One of the security officers went down under a swarm of them. His screams vanishing into the pulse, Kane shoved Mara toward the corridor. "Move, that's an order." She hesitated, a heartbeat. Too long, but then grabbed the nearest officer and pulled him toward the exit. The team fired in controlled bursts, carving a bloody path through the drones. Kane back toward the core, firing with one hand, holding the detonator in the other. The walls were closing in, literally, the living metal bending toward him, spines sprouting from the floor like claws. The swarm's voice slithered into his mind again, not Reese this time, but something deeper, older. "Elias Kane, surrender and live. Fight and be forgotten." Kane grit his teeth. "You should have stayed out of my galaxy." The timer hit 3 seconds, and Kane turned and ran. The blast came an instant later. Soundless eruption of light and force that tore through the chamber. The shockwave ripped apart the core, its pulsing glow shattering into 1,000 fragments. The energy spread like wildfire along the ships, living walls tearing them apart. The floor beneath Kane buckled, throwing him forward into the corridor. He felt the heat of the explosion chasing him every step. He crashed through the final bulkhead and into the Vanguard's docking bay as the emergency seals slammed shut behind him. The shock hit a second later, rattling the entire bay. The Vanguard itself groaned under the force as though the enemy ship's death throes were trying to drag them with it. Mara was already there, pulling him to his feet, her face pale but fierce. "We're not done yet." Captain, the swarm fleet outside was in chaos without. The cores signaled, their movements became erratic. Ships collided with each other, firing blindly. The pulse that had gripped the crew's minds vanished like a heavy fog lifting for the first time in days. The bridge came alive with shouted reports, Captain, enemy formations breaking off their retreating. Kane stumbled into his chair, his vision still ringing from the blast. Orders to all batteries, fire on anything still in range. The Vanguard's weapons lit the darkness blue, plasma slicing through the disoriented swarm. Vessels' explosions blossomed like dying stars across the void. Within minutes, the survivors of the swarm were nothing more than fading lights in the distance. The crew stared at the view screen as the last of them vanished into the black. Kane exhaled for the first time in what felt like a lifetime status report. Mara's voice carried a rare note of triumph. "Hull at 40%, weapons drained, shields nearly gone, but we're alive." Kane allowed the faintest smile. "We hold the line." The bridge fell into a tired quiet, the kind that came only after surviving the impossible. The galaxy wasn't safe, not completely. The swarm wasn't gone, only scattered and wounded. But for now, the worlds under Earth's protection could breathe again. Kane stared out into the stars, thinking of Reese, wondering if somewhere out there, a piece of him still existed, or if he had been consumed entirely by the swarm. Mara broke his thoughts. "Captain, incoming transmission from Earth Command." Kane straightened Patchett through the screen, flickered to reveal the familiar seal of Earth Defense. AE. Voice filled the bridge. "We received your signal, Vanguard. The line is secure. The swarm is in retreat." Kane's gaze stayed fixed on the stars as he answered, "For now, but they'll be back, and when they come, we'll be ready." The channel closed, and silence returned. The Vanguard drifted in the debris field, her scars deep, but her engines still burning. The crew began slow repairs, each knowing the war wasn't over. The galaxy had been given a second chance, and it was bought with fire and steel. Kane rose from his chair and looked to Mara. "Set a course for home, but keep the guns warm out there somewhere." The swarm was already planning their return, and when they came, they would find Earth waiting at the line once again.